The Chinese Communist Party is undoubtedly aligning itself with Russia. Why does Xi Jinping have such a strong affinity for Russia, even to the extent that Russia has earned the nickname Russia Daddy in China? What's the reasoning behind Xi Jinping's close ties with Russia? Hi, I'm Dongxiang. Welcome to Dig Into China, where we take a deeper look at China to reveal insights you can rarely find anywhere else. Some argue that the Chinese Communist Party cozies up to Russia because Russia holds compromising information about it, and the party appeases Russia out of fear of exposure. However, I believe this perspective greatly underestimates the CCP. To begin with, it's unclear whether the Chinese Communist Party even worries about such compromising material. Even if it exists, what real impact would it have on the party? With Xi's great firewall in place, this isn't a major concern for them. From a realistic perspective, Xi Jinping seems to have strong reasons for aligning with Russia. Since coming to power, Xi Jinping has repeatedly signaled a desire to challenge the US-led global order. But who could stand alongside China to counter the US, akin to an alliance like the Axis in World War II? Only authoritarian states such as Iran, North Korea, and Russia, which share a similar worldview with the Chinese Communist Party, seem to be suitable allies. Of course, this new Axis-like alliance is far from comparable to the former Germany-Italy-Japan coalition. If Russia were to lose in Ukraine, Putin's regime would be in serious jeopardy. While his downfall wouldn't necessarily lead to Russia's democratization, it would undoubtedly weaken Russia's power, making an already fragile alliance even weaker. This is likely the key reason why Xi Jinping is so resolute in supporting Russia to win this war. In Xi Jinping's eyes, Russia is China's most crucial ally, and because of this belief, he can't afford to abandon Russia. However, I believe Xi's perspective is deeply flawed, and he has fallen into a cognitive trap. Although both Russia and China are authoritarian regimes, I believe that even if the Chinese Communist Party wants to maintain its hold on power, it should not align itself with Russia. Xi Jinping's approach not only fails to strengthen his rule, but actually weakens it. Why do I say this? And where does Xi's cognitive error lie? Let me first introduce a political concept, the distinction between land powers and sea powers. This is an ancient concept that dates back to before World War I, describing two different development paths. To help clarify the difference between the two, I'll provide an example to make it easier to understand what constitutes a land power and a sea power. Japan and the United Kingdom were both invaders of China in modern times, but their motives were entirely different. The British had no interest in China's land. Their invasion was primarily to open Chinese ports and facilitate trade. Even when they took Hong Kong as a colony, it was for trade purposes, not for territorial conquest. A similar case is Portugal, which only occupied Macau to monopolize trade with Japan and China, rather than seeking to conquer these nations. Japan, on the other hand, had a very different aim. Japan's objective was straightforward: to conquer all of China, regardless of China's willingness to trade. The goal was to seize China's resources. The difference between these two countries lies not in their relative power, but in their approach to gaining advantages or benefits through war. Land powers believe that land itself holds value, and they aim to expand their territory in order to exploit its resources for growth. In contrast, sea powers do not view land as a direct source of value. Instead, they profit through trade and seek to secure trade monopolies through war, using this control to fuel their development. The focus of each is fundamentally different. Land powers are called land powers because they control territory, while sea powers are called sea powers because, in that era, controlling maritime routes was key to controlling trade. In other words, naval power equates trade power. In the present day, both types of countries still exist. The United States is a classic example of a sea power, and most countries worldwide are also sea powers, relying on trade for development. The world has moved away from the old zero-sum game mentality. It has become evident that the positive-sum games, where all parties benefit, are more favorable for everyone's growth as countries trade and prosper together. Are there land powers today? Yes, but they are few, with Russia being the most prominent example. Russia is one of the few countries that still relies on war and territorial expansions to generate the gains. There are two main ways Russia benefits from war. One is through direct plundering, and the other is by boosting the value of its existing assets through conflict. In terms of plundering, Russia mainly relies on the Wagner Group. According to past reports by the Wall Street Journal, after Russia's intervention in the Syrian civil war in 2015, Wagner began its operations in Syria. The group provided security for Syria's dictator Bashar Assad and for numerous oil fields in the country. In exchange for protection, each oil field under Wagner security was required to allocate 25% of its crude oil production to the group. By 2017, Wagner was guarding Syria's 4 largest oil fields. Moreover, the Wagner Group is highly active in Africa. For instance, Wagner has been responsible for the security of CAR, Central African Republic President Faustin Archange Touadéra, and has assisted him in suppressing opposition. In return, Touadéra has sold the country's resources to Wagner, including the largest gold mine in CAR, the Dasima mine. According to international mining agreements, this mine has already produced $3 billion worth of gold for Russia. Additionally, Russia profits from timber and diamonds in CAR, with timber generating over $1 billion and a diamond revenue estimated at more than $800 billion. These are just a fraction of Wagner's activities, as the group operates in more than half of Africa's nations. Beyond Africa and the Middle East, Wagner also has operations in Latin America. Through these conflicts, Russia has secured significant benefits, mainly in the form of various resources. On the other hand, Russia's direct military actions also drive up oil prices. Since Putin's rise to power, Russia has launched 3 significant invasions: the 2008 invasion of Georgia, the 2014 annexation of Crimea, and the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Each of these conflicts has been followed by a spike in oil prices, which in turn increases the value of Russia's resource wealth. This solidifies Russia as a quintessential land power. So why do I consider Xi Jinping's approach foolish? It goes back to China's own status. What kind of country is China? In fact, China is a maritime power, but Xi Jinping does not think like a leader of a maritime nation. Instead, he has mistakenly adopted the mindset of a land power and has been pursuing development based on the model of a land power. Why is China considered a maritime power? When we look at China's development, the rapid growth over the past few decades can be attributed not only to the hard work of the Chinese people, but also to China's accession to the World Trade Organization. Even the most ardent nationalists would likely agree on this point. Joining the WTO essentially meant that China became part of the global trade system, aligning itself with the group of maritime powers. In addition to its history of growth, China's future development requires following the path of a maritime power. For instance, to continue advancing, China needs to expand trade with Africa and Latin America. To escape the middle-income trap, China must also focus on developing high-tech industries, particularly in the new 3 sectors: electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and solar panels, which will depend on global exports, among other strategies. China's future development is intrinsically linked to trade, making it a clear example of a modern maritime power, having achieved growth through maritime strength. However, there is a significant discrepancy in China's self-perception. Xi Jinping and other Chinese leaders, in terms of their self-awareness and foreign policy, have adopted the mindset of a land power, mistakenly viewing China as a land power rather than recognizing its true nature as a maritime nation. Xi Jinping's land power mentality is reflected in various aspects of his policies. For example, his focus on internal circulation since taking office aligns with the thinking of a land power. By rejecting trade and effectively cutting off maritime trade routes, he has also tightened control over Hong Kong. Under Xi's leadership, Hong Kong has seen a significant increase in control, which can be seen as a form of reoccupation. However, this increased control has led to the the erosion of Hong Kong's status as a key hub for foreign investment, as it has been increasingly restricted under Xi's policies. Only land power would sacrifice their trade advantages for territorial control, and this is reflected in Xi Jinping's obsession with the Taiwan issue. From a rational standpoint, launching a war against Taiwan offers China no real benefits. It would not foster economic growth, but instead could lead to sanctions and the loss of trade opportunities, essentially undermining the maritime power that once fueled China's development. Despite this, Xi's continued focus on Taiwan reveals the lingering influence of land power thinking. This change in perspective is already visible in Taiwan. Nowadays, few people talk about retaking the mainland. Some suggest this is because the Taiwanese are more focused on their own lives, while others point to the vast power imbalance between the two sides. However, I believe the real reason lies in Taiwan's adoption of 21st century thinking. For a maritime power, trying to retake the mainland offers little to no benefits. What value is there in acquiring more land if it doesn't contribute to progress? So why pursue it? This territorial mindset isn't just held by Xi Jinping, it seems to be pervasive throughout Chinese society. For example, when I argue that taking Taiwan would bring no real benefit, some nationalists, often labeled as pink, will counter with, how could it have no benefits? If we take Taiwan, we gain control of TSMC. But this is essentially the same land power thinking. Just as Russia seeks to seize oil, here the focus is on capturing companies. Fundamentally, both approaches were about extracting value through control rather than fostering opportunities through cooperation. A notable example of the land power mentality among many Chinese can be seen in their interpretation of the First Gulf War. When the conflict erupted, the dominant narrative in China was that the United States invaded Iraq solely to seize its oil. However, the reality is that after the war, the US pulled out without taking control of Iraq's oil resources. This idea that American military intervention is driven by a desire to seize resources reflects a typical land power mindset. That being said, it's important to recognize that the US did intervene in Iraq for no reason or out of pure altruism. The invasion was rooted in the logic of a maritime power. The real reason for US involvement was Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, which destabilized the region and posed a threat to global security. This disruption in the Middle East has seen an undermining the international order and jeopardizing the vital maritime rules that the US has built and maintained as part of its global influence. Only by moving away from the traditional land power mindset can one fully grasp the complexities of global diplomacy. However, Xi Jinping's failure to recognize this has led to a somewhat absurd diplomatic situation. In the current axis of powers, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, it's clear that with the exception of China, the other three countries are quintessential land powers. The concept of land power is certainly quite popular in Russia, with Dugin, who is a long advocate for the disintegration of China, being one of its main proponents. However, Russia is a true land power, so it makes sense for them to embrace this ideology. But for China, a maritime power, to adopt this land power mindset and ally with other land powers is utterly ridiculous. The Chinese Communist Party, by consistently adopting a land power mentality, has progressively cut off its economic ties and, by aligning with other land powers, has been increasingly excluded from the global maritime trade system led by sea powers. As a result, China has gradually been sidelined from trade with the US and Europe. While Russia, as a close ally, has boosted trade with China in recent years, its contribution remains a mere drop in the bucket in terms of China's total trade volume. At this critical juncture, Europe has become even more important for China. The country is facing typical overcapacity, particularly in the new three sectors, areas that are increasingly subject to sanctions and trade barriers from both the US and Europe. It now seems that exports of these products to the US are completely out of the question. And the EU has also raised the tariffs on Chinese goods. So who will China sell its electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and solar panels to? With such immense production capacity, how will China manage this surplus? Losing access to the two largest automotive markets, America and Europe, can China realistically rely on Russia to absorb its electric vehicle exports? Xi Jinping's focus on a land power approach and alliances with other land power nations is gradually causing China to lose its trade influence, leading to further economic decline. The legitimacy of the CCP has always been rooted in economic progress. While Xi may see confronting the US as essential to securing his rule, China should avoid aligning with countries like Russia, Iran, or North Korea, taking actions against Hong Kong, obsessing over Taiwan. These choices undermine China's broader interests. Xi Jinping's short-sightedness may cause suffering for the Chinese people in the short term, but in the long run, it might turn out to be fortunate. If Xi had adopted a sea power mentality and maintained a pro-European, anti-Russian foreign policy, China's economy could have continued to grow, and the Communist Party could have preserved its rule for much longer. This would have prolonged the process of challenging the CCP's authority. In a sense, Xi's own lack of insight is weakening the CCP's long-term stability. While Chinese people may experience a decline in living standards in the short term, it might not be entirely harmful in the long run. Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my video to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, be well.